In the hush of candlelight, you find yourself stepping softly into a Tudor home. The walls are timber and wattle, the air faintly carrying the scent of rushes spread across the floor. It is quieter than you expect, almost too quiet, as if the whole household is holding its breath. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. Although you might picture the Tudors as distant nobles and kings, grand feasts and royal courts, most Tudor homes were far humbler, filled with the everyday murmurs of ordinary families. The truth is, the household was not only a place to sleep, but a bustling, breathing world where servants, children, and parents all lived side by side, sharing warmth, bread, and whispered stories. Stay with me here in a moment. You'll see why something as simple as a wooden spoon or a flickering rushlight could reveal more about Tudor life than a crown ever could. This is not a tale of battles or courtsits, the texture of life. The sound of wool skirts brushing the floor, the clink of pewter at supper. As you breathe slowly, imagine the hearth glowing low, and know that you are safe, unhurried, and welcome to linger. Tonight, you will drift through one Tudor household, and by the end, you may feel as if you've lived there, quietly yourself. When you first open the heavy wooden door to a Tudor household, the cool draft of night air follows you inside, and you realize that warmth here is something earned, not constant. The hearth is the heart of the room, its embers glowing with a softness that barely reaches the corners, where shadows nestle like quiet companions. You pause, adjusting to the dim light, and hear the faint rustle of straw underfoot, strewn in place of carpets to sweeten the air and soften steps. The scent of herbs lingers, perhaps lavender or thyme, woven into the rushes not only for freshness, but also as a shield against pests. You take a slow breath, and it feels as though the room itself exhales with you. Steady and calm, but strikes you first is not grandeur, but intimacy. Unlike the sprawling castles we imagine when thinking of Tudor times, most people lived in modest houses of timber, frames and plaster. Homes that creaked in the wind and smelled of smoke and baking bread. And here's where the story bends in an unexpected way. Even the humblest Tudor house was a stage of ceaseless activity, a choreography of survival and ritual. You might expect quiet solitude after dark, yet the night was alive with small sounds, the crackle of the fire, the shuffle of servants tending embers, the gentle murmur of prayers whispered before sleep. Stay with me. In a moment, you'll discover why these small rituals meant so much. As the firelight flickers across faces, you notice how the household is not merely family, but an entire community. Servants, apprentices, sometimes even distant cousins, share this same roof, bound by duty and dependence. The master of the house may sit a little taller near the hearth, but even his authority is softened by the fabric of interdependence. In the Tudor world, a household was more than shelter. It was a microcosm of society itself. Each person had a role, and the house was the stage where they performed it. From the smallest child learning to carry water to the mistress overseeing bread rising in the oven. And in these quiet motions lies the true heartbeat of Tudor England. Let's turn the lamp a little lower in our minds and picture supper. The day's labor has ended, and the family gathers. The table is simple, perhaps rough-hewn oak, heavy with the wear of years. On it rests a modest meal, coarse bread, a pot of pottage, simmered with whatever vegetables the season allows. Maybe a scrap of meat, if fortune is kind. Pewter dishes gleam dully in the firelight, and wooden spoons stir with soft clinks. There is no sharp clatter here. No rush, each bite is steady, communal, respectful of the effort it took to place food on the table. The children's eyes droop with fatigue, their hands sticky with crumbs, while the older ones sneak glances at prentices, at the shifting order of roles and futures that loom quietly ahead. And as you breathe with this scene, imagine the air cooling, the glow of tallow candles, soft but smoky. This is the part that most people miss. The Tudor night was a fragile landscape of light and dark. Candles were costly. Most households relied on rushlights, simple reeds dipped in fat, burning unevenly, flickering with an almost living pulse. That trembling glow guided hands as they folded linens, sealed letters, or stitched a last tear before bed. To modern eyes it might seem dim, but to them it was a trusted friend, keeping shadows at bay until the first pale thread of dawn. And in a moment, you'll see why even shadows were welcome companions. For now, picture yourself seated near the hearth, wrapped in the murmurs of voices around you. The talk is not of politics or great wars, but of the weather, the health of animals, the price of grain. Gentle topics that sway like leaves in a breeze. And here's the tender twist. In the safety of these ordinary exchanges, the Tudor household created its own fortress of calm, stronger in some ways than stone walls. The house was not simply shelter from rain, but shelter from uncertainty. A place where each person knew their place in the weave of daily life. And as you listen, you feel that same reassurance, a sense that here, in this flickering light, all is as it should be. Time slows in these walls. The sound of a distant church bell carries faintly through the cool air, marking the hour, reminding you that life is guided by rhythms larger than your own. The fire pops softly. A log shifts. The children, now asleep, are lifted gently to their straw mattresses, while the mistress draws her shawl tighter, whispering a final prayer. And as you drift further into this scene, safe and unhurried, you sense the presence of centuries, how these walls once held lives just like yours, their voices soft, their breath steady in the same darkness. The Tudor household, humble yet alive, is not a relic but a lantern glowing in history's night. And by following its light, you will see the threads that still tie us to them. In a moment, we'll step deeper into the morning routines, the stirring of ovens, and the songs that began each day. But for now, let the embers guide your breathing, let the hush of straw beneath your feet soften your thoughts, and rest in the warmth of this home, where time has slowed enough for sleep to find you. When the first pale light of dawn reaches a Tudor household, it is not silence that greets it, but a quiet stirring, a rhythm that has been repeated for generations. The rooster's call may sound in the yard, sharp against the soft air, but inside the house the movements are muted fabric rustling, the creak of wooden boards, the soft thump of bare feet against straw. You can almost hear the breath of the household changing, from the deep sighs of sleep to the steady pace of a day beginning. Stay with me. In a moment you'll see how even the smallest morning task shaped the rhythm of life here. The mistress of the house rises early, often before anyone else, wrapping herself in a woolen gown against the chill. There is no fire left from the night before, so one of the first duties is coaxing embers back to life or striking flint to steel until sparks catch. Imagine the sound tiny, metallic, hesitant until it blossoms into the quiet roar of flame. The hearth comes alive again, not just with warmth but with purpose. For everything flows from its heat, water for washing, bread for baking, broth for sustenance. To begin the day without fire was unthinkable. The hearth was the household's pulse, and each morning it was gently restarted, Children wake to these sounds, stretching under their coarse woolen blankets, yawning into the cool air. They rub their eyes and pull on simple garments, often the same ones worn day after day, mended by patient hands that turn scraps into sturdy wear. Apprentices and servants stir soon after, for their work begins with the dawn. Water must be drawn from a well or stream, heavy buckets balanced on aching arms, and animals must be tended before the sun fully rises. And here's the quiet twist. While the nobility may have spoken of honor and duty in grand terms, for most Tudors duty was the steady turning of daily tasks, the kind that ensured survival, the kind that left little room for idleness. As you imagine the household rising, let's soften the light even further. Picture the first meal of the day, not the rich breakfast you might expect, but something far simpler. A bowl of pottage, warmed from yesterday's leftovers, perhaps with a piece of coarse bread and a mug of small ale, weaker than modern beer but safer than most water. The taste is earthy, plain, and yet in this moment it carries the comfort of routine. Eating together, even briefly, reminded each member of their place, their connection, and if you listen closely, you can hear snatches of morning prayer woven between spoonfuls, a whispered rhythm that carried faith into the work ahead. And in a moment, you'll see why this ritual of prayer was more than habit. In a world where illness, poor harvests, and political shifts could strike without warning, prayer was not only piety, but also reassurance. Each invocation to God was like adding another stone to the invisible walls that protected the home. Just as the hearth was coaxed to flame, so too was the household spirit coaxed into strength. Safe, warm, and together they faced the day. As the morning stretches on, the house grows busier. The mistress oversees bread making, kneading dough with practiced hands, her palms pressing into the soft, sticky mass, flour rising like a ghostly cloud around her. An apprentice chops wood outside, the steady rhythm echoing into the room. A servant spins wool into thread, the wheel humming softly, almost hypnotically, while another mends garments by the window, the faint light catching on the needle's glint. Each task may seem small, but together they form a web of life where nothing is wasted, no hand idle, no hour unclaimed. And still, through all this bustle, there is gentleness. The work is steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Stay with me, Bee, 'cause now, as you imagine the day unfolding, you'll notice the animals. Chickens scratching in the yard, their feathers rustling, pigs snuffling in their pen, perhaps a cow or two waiting patiently for milking. These creatures were not only food sources, but companions, woven into the daily sounds of the house. Their presence was constant, a reminder of dependence on nature's rhythm. And though the chores could be tiring, there was comfort in their familiarity. The same way a child's laughter or the creak of the door became part of the household's song, the bell of the parish church might ring in the distance, marking the hours, guiding prayers, or summoning some to duties beyond the home. Life outside could be uncertain, markets bustling, laws shifting, whispers of court intrigue filtering even into quiet villages. But inside the household, mornings carried a slower certainty. Each day began the same: fire, food, prayer, chores, and in that sameness lay safety. To us it may seem monotonous, but to them it was the very rhythm that carried life forward. As the sun climbs higher, the air inside warms, and you can almost feel the household exhale again, settling into its pace. Threads of conversation weave between tasks, stories of neighbors, plans for planting or mending roofs. The children wide-eyed absorb it all, learning not just through words but by watching hands at work. And here lies the deeper truth. A Tudor child's education began not with parchment and quill, but with observing, listening, absorbing the music of household life. By living within this small world, they learned their place in the larger one, and now, as you picture the morning giving way to midday, let yourself rest in this rhythm too. Feel the warmth of the fire, the steady hum of spinning wheels, the faint sound of chickens outside. Breathe with the house, slow and steady, as if you too are part of its fabric. You are safe here, wrapped in the same patterns that soothed countless lives before yours. And when you are ready, we will step with care into the next part of the day, carrying with us the calm assurance that comes from knowing each moment has its place. By midday, the Tudor household has shifted fully into its rhythm, like a song that grows stronger as each verse is sung. The light through the narrow windows is brighter now, though still softened by the wattle and daub walls, casting pale golden pools across the wooden floor. The air is filled with scents, the earthy smell of baking bread, the sharp tang of ale, the faint sweetness of herbs hung in bundles to dry. And in these details lies another truth, one that many overlook. Food was not just sustenance, but the steady heartbeat of a household's daily life. Stay with me. In a moment, you'll discover how even the humblest meal told a story of faith, fortune, and family. At the center of this story is bread. It is difficult to overstate its importance. For the Tudor family, bread was the foundation of almost every meal. Coarse, dark loaves for the poor, finer white manchet bread for the wealthy. Its texture, color, and taste marked your place in society. Imagine the feel of it in your hands, heavy, rough, filling, carrying the earthy scent of ground grains. To eat bread was to take part in a ritual that tied you to the land, to the miller who ground the flour, to the baker who shaped the dough, and to the countless hands that had shared the same staple for centuries. Beside bread came pottage, the simmering stew that could stretch scraps into nourishment. Its flavor shifted with the season's cabbage, peas, leeks, onions, sometimes thickened with barley or oats. Occasionally, if fortune allowed, a sliver of bacon or a bone might deepen its taste, a rare indulgence savored slowly. The pot simmered endlessly, flavors layering upon one another, always ready to offer warmth. And here lies the gentle twist. While great banquets dazzled the nobility, for most households it was this humble pot, bubbling day after day, that carried life itself. Imagine now the act of gathering at the table. The mistress oversees, her eyes ensuring fair portions, while the master leads a prayer, heads bowed in quiet reverence. The children fidget, trying to sit still, their hands reaching eagerly for bread. Servants wait their turn, patient, respectful, knowing that all depend upon the same pot. There is no haste, no chatter louder than the crackle of the fire, the clink of spoons, the breaking of bread. The low murmur of voices all merge into a soundscape of calm, a lullaby of daily sustenance. And stay with me, because here comes a detail worth noticing. What they drank. Water was rarely trusted, carrying sickness as often as refreshment. Instead, small ale, weak and nourishing, flowed with nearly every meal. Its taste was mild, far from intoxicating, and it carried the reassurance of safety. Children drank it, too, their small wooden cups clutched carefully in both hands. To sip ale in the warmth of midday was not indulgence but protection, a small shield against unseen dangers. After the meal, the household did not rest idly. Tasks continued, each tied to the season and the needs of the moment. In summer, gardens demanded tending. In autumn, stores had to be prepared for winter's chill. In spring, planting pressed every hand into service. Even indoors, work unfolded, linen washed, wool spun, candles dipped in slow, steady motions. The smell of tallow filled the air, sharp but necessary, for without light, nights would swallow the home. Every motion, no matter how small, contributed to survival, and each carried the quiet dignity of purpose. And as you picture these tasks, let your breathing slow to match their rhythm. Dip by dip, stitch by stitch, the Tudor household built its days not with grand gestures but with steady repetition. There is peace in such patterns, a reassurance that each effort, no matter how small, holds meaning. And perhaps you sense it now. Tooth away even your own small routines. The quiet acts you repeat each day create their own music of safety and belonging. When evening approaches, shadows lengthen again, stretching across the yard, softening the edges of the house. The hearth is stoked once more, filling the air with warmth, while animals are brought in or secured for the night. Children grow drowsy, their energy spent in play or chores, while the mistress lays out supper, not so different from the day's first meal. Yet there is comfort in this sameness, the gentle assurance that tomorrow will echo today. And here is the tender truth to carry with you. The Tudor household, though modest, was a fortress of rhythm. Its meals, its prayers, its chores all repeated with such steady devotion that uncertainty itself seemed to soften at the threshold. Life beyond might shift, monarchs rising and falling, markets surging, weather turning, but within these walls the day's rhythm held steady, and that steadiness was its strength, a quiet power often overlooked in the louder histories of the age. Now, as night draws its curtain once more, imagine yourself seated again by the hearth, the rushlight flickering gently, the voices around you soft and steady. Let the sound of bread breaking, the smell of herbs, the taste of ale linger in your senses, wrapping you in the same calm assurance that countless Tudor households once knew. Rest here a moment, safe, unhurried, until we step softly into the deeper hours of the night. As night settles once again over the Tudor household, you might think the day is finished, that beds are sought and silence reigns. But the truth is softer, more intricate. Evening was not only for rest, but also for weaving threads of community and care. Imagine the slow closing of shutters, the soft drop of the bar across the door, the air thickening with the smoke of the hearth as it stoked to last the night. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how evenings were the bridge between labor and dreams. A time when the house truly revealed its heart. The children, though tired, often found a second wind after supper. They might huddle near the fire, tracing patterns in the rushes, or whispering to one another while an elder told a tale. Storytelling was not mere pastime, it was education, comfort, and binding thread. Through fables, legends, and sometimes cautionary tales, children learned their place in the world. The rise and fall of a voice in candlelight could shape memory more deeply than parchment ever could. Picture it, faces illuminated by flame, eyes wide, voices hushed when the tale turned mysterious, and laughter released like a sigh when it ended well. The mistress often took these hours to mend clothes or spin thread, her hands working steadily while her mind lingered in prayer or thought. The sound of the spinning wheel was almost like a lullaby, steady, unbroken, reassuring. Meanwhile, The master might review accounts, tallying grain, firewood, or debts owed, his quill scratching faintly on parchment by the dim light. And here lies the gentle twist though evenings carried work. They were filled with a quieter, slower rhythm, one that eased rather than pressed. Now let us turn the lamp even lower and picture the sleeping arrangements. Unlike our modern sense of privacy, most Tudor households shared their beds. Parents might share with infants, older children with siblings, and servants often slept nearby. Beds were precious, layered with straw or feathers if fortune allowed, covered by heavy woolen blankets. Curtains might hang around the bed, not just for warmth, but for a sense of intimacy within a crowded room. Imagine drawing those curtains closed, hearing the muted world beyond, and feeling safe in a cocoon of warmth and fabric. And in a moment, you'll see why even the act of sleep was tied to community. Beds were not only places of rest, but of safety. To sleep near another meant warmth shared, breath mingled, fear eased. Loneliness rarely entered a Tudor home, for even in sleep, life was communal. Perhaps you can feel it, now, the reassurance of knowing someone is near. The rhythm of their breathing steadying your own, before sleep truly claimed them. Prayers were whispered again, this time softer, intimate, pleading for protection through the night. Night was feared, after all, as the hour of sickness, of spirits, of uncertainty. And yet, by layering prayer upon prayer, warmth upon warmth, the household built its fortress against the dark. Shadows crept across beams, the rushlight burned low, and dreams carried each soul gently beyond the reach of worry. If you listen closely, you can hear the layers of sound fading, the crackle of the hearth, the final coughs of children, the distant lowing of animals settling in the yard. Then comes stillness, not empty but alive with quiet. And in that stillness, the Tudor household breathes as one, its rhythms carrying all safely into the night. And perhaps you too, listening here, can let that same rhythm draw you toward your own rest, knowing that nothing presses, nothing hurries, only time flowing gently, steady as breath. When morning comes again, it brings with it not only the sound of chores, but also the rhythm of worship. The Tudor world was steeped in faith, so deeply that even the smallest acts of the household were framed within it. Stay with me, 'cause in a moment you'll see how our household's very walls seemed to hum with prayers, and how faith offered not fear but comfort, a quiet rhythm guiding each day. The day began, always, with grace, whether said in Latin phrases learned by rote or in simple English words. The prayer before bread reminded each person that survival itself was not taken for granted. The mistress, kneeling briefly before the hearth, might ask for health and protection for her children. The master, steady and solemn, might whisper for good harvests and safety in the markets. Even children, their words, stammered and halting, were folded into this shared moment. To pray together was to align breath and purpose, to remind one another that they were never alone. The walls of the home bore witness to such prayers countless times. In corners, small wooden crosses or painted icons rested. On shelves, a worn book of hours might lie, its pages finger-stained from use, its images faded but beloved. And here lies the quiet twist. Though faith in Tudor times could be marked by national conflict, reformations, and political upheaval, inside the home it was something gentler woven, not into debate, but into bread and fire. As the day wore on, faith continued to guide each act. The ringing of the parish bell reminded the household of Mass or holy days. Work was paused for festivals, the air alive with song and music, laughter spilling into the night. Even within the plainest home, joy had its place, carried by hymns, by dances, by shared feasts. And in this, faith was not heavy but light, lifting hearts as easily as it steadied them. Children grew in this atmosphere, absorbing not only scripture but the sense of rhythm faith provided. To them, prayer was no separate act, but part of the day's natural weave, like feeding animals, like sweeping floors. It came without sharp division, slipping easily into the breath of life. And perhaps you can sense it now, too, that comfort in routine, in knowing each moment holds meaning when tied to something greater. Stay with me here, because night carried faith most tenderly. At the day's end, when fears might creep in, when illness or hunger whispered in the dark, prayers rose once more, wrapping the household in invisible cloth. The rushlight flickered, the bed curtains closed, and each whispered amen was like a hand laid gently on another's shoulder. That is how faith lived in the Tudor home. Not as debate, not as force, but as warmth shared, as reassurance breathed so. As you picture this household kneeling softly in the dim glow of evening, feel your own breath fall into that same rhythm. Slow, steady, safe. Let the prayer of centuries become your own lullaby, and rest in the knowledge that just as they were carried, so too are you, wrapped in quiet strength, safe in the house of time. By now you felt the rhythm of Tudor life settling around you, and as we step deeper into the household, the sounds of work grow clearer. For the Tudor family, work was not confined to daylight. It began with dawn and stretched until shadows softened at night. And yet, what might seem to us as endless labor carried its own form of comfort. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how even the wear of work created the music of belonging, and why the smallest motions brooms sweep, a knife scrape with a heartbeat of the home. Imagine the mistress of the house, her sleeves rolled above her wrists, moving with quiet grace through tasks that never truly ended. She directed the rhythm. Bread kneaded, ale brewed, cloth spun, children tended. Each gesture flowed into the next, as seamless as breath. The air filled with scents that shifted throughout the dayflower dust, damp wool, the tank of herbs drying above the hearth. The house was not silent, but humming, each sound belonging, none out of place. The servants, too, carried their share. The youngest might gather kindling, the older fetch water, their shoulders bending under the weight of pails. You can almost hear the slosh, the water dripping against stone, the grunt as buckets are set down. Outside, apprentices tended animals, cleaned tools, or mended fences. Work, though constant, held a rhythm that matched the seasons. In spring, the excitement of planting brought energy. In summer, the heat demanded long endurance. In autumn, the rush of harvest pressed every hand into service. And in winter, the tasks moved indoors, centered around warmth and survival. And here's the quiet twist. For most Tudors, idleness was not just frowned upon, it was feared. To be idle was to invite misfortune, to allow weakness or temptation to creep in. But within this fear lay reassurance. Work itself was safety. As long as the household hummed with tasks, as long as each person's hands were busy, the home felt secure. It is not so different from the comfort we feel today in familiar routines. The way folding laundry or stirring a pot can ground us when the world feels uncertain. Let's pause here and listen again. The creak of the spinning wheel, steady as a heartbeat. The sound of the pestle grinding herbs. the chop of wood splitting, echoing in the yard. Each noise blends into a lullaby of industry, gentle and soothing. Even the animals contribute. The low cluck of hens, the snuffle of pigs, the occasional bark of a dog. To live in a Tudor household was to live inside a constant symphony of life, never silent, always flowing. Stay with me, Bee, 'cause in a moment you'll see how work shaped identity itself. For children, each small chore was a lesson. Sweeping floors, gathering eggs, carding wool, these were not meaningless errands, but the very education that prepared them for adulthood. To serve the household was to learn patience, diligence, humility. And to serve well meant one day they could manage their own. So every small hand carrying water, every young eye watching bread rise, was taking in the unspoken lessons of survival. The mistress's work, though endless, carried dignity. She was the keeper of warmth, the measure of plenty, the one who wove the daily thread. The master's duties, though heavier in matters of law or land, still intertwined with hers, and together they created balance. Even apprentices, often bound by contracts, learned their place within this rhythm, becoming part of the extended household family. And though the work was heavy, the atmosphere was rarely harsh. There was laughter woven into the toil, small songs sung while churning butter or spinning wool, the kind of tunes that lightened breath without breaking rhythm. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the work shifted again. Grain might be measured and stored, floors swept anew, or animals herded closer for nightfall. Children grew sleepy but resisted bed, lingering by the fire until their heads nodded forward. And as the last tasks of the day ended, the household gathered once more by the hearth, the sense of shared effort wrapping around them like a blanket. So now, as you imagine these countless hands working in harmony, feel the reassurance of their rhythm. Each gesture, no matter how small, carried meaning. Each sound became part of the music of survival. And as you breathe slowly, you may feel yourself carried along by that same rhythm, steady, grounding, safe. For in a Tudor household, work was not merely labor. It was the very melody of life, humming through each moment, keeping fear at bay, and weaving comfort into the air you breathe. If the day in a Tudor household was ruled by work, then the soul of the home was marked by learning. And yet, learning did not always mean books and quills. It often came by hand and by ear, through repetition and watching. Stay close, because in a moment you'll see how children learned not just to read, but to live. How apprenticeships and stories shaped their futures, and why education was both humble and profound for children of wealth. A tutor might be hired, parchment and ink laid before them, Latin phrases whispered into their ears. But for most, learning came through the rhythm of chores. To milk a cow, to spin thread, to knead dough, these were lessons in survival. The soft cluck of chickens in the yard was a classroom. The creak of the loom a lecture, the folding of linen a gentle exam passed each day. Knowledge was not something kept apart, but something woven into life itself. Apprenticeships marked another kind of education. A boy of 12 might be sent to live with a craftsman, bound for 7 years or more, learning a trade that would sustain him. Imagine the nervousness of that first night away from home, the smell of unfamiliar walls, the sound of tools clinking in a strange workshop. And yet, over time, the motions became familiar. The trade became second nature, and the apprentice was transformed into a craftsman himself. Girls, too, learned through household tasks, gaining the skills needed to manage homes of their own one day. Spinning, weaving, cooking, brewing each chore was a form of knowledge, each repetition a preparation. Though it may seem narrow to us now, for them it was a kind of wisdom, tying them to centuries of tradition and ensuring the household never faltered. And here lies the quiet twist. Though literacy was limited, storytelling filled the gap. Tales told by the hearth, legends repeated by elders, ballads sung during festivals, carried memory and meaning. A child might never write their name, but they could recite long histories, moral lessons, or prayers with ease. Words carried in the air, in song and story, became the foundation upon which lives were built. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how this shaped their sense of belonging. To know the same story, to repeat the same prayer, was to be part of a chain stretching back generations. Learning was not solitary, but communal, shared in whispers, in songs, in daily patterns. That sense of shared memory, stronger than any single book, was the true education of a Tudor home. The church played a role too, teaching through sermons, through stained glass windows alive with colour and story, through the ringing of bells that reminded all of the rhythm of life. Even those who could not read the scriptures could still learn from their patterns, their images, their sounds. And in this way, education was not only of the mind but of the senses, woven into the very fabric of living. As night returned, the household drew closer again, and children fell asleep with tales still echoing in their ears. Apprentices dreaming of their trade, girls imagining the homes they would one day tend. And perhaps you too, listening now, can feel the comfort of learning through rhythm and repetition, the safety of being carried along by stories, by songs, by the voices of those who came before. So breathe slowly and let yourself drift with them. For in a Tudor household, education was not only knowledge, it was memory, belonging, and the steady hand of time passing lessons from one generation to the next. Even as the rhythms of labour and prayer shaped the Tudor household, there was another quiet but powerful force that guided daily life, the seasons. Unlike our world of artificial light and constant supplies, Tudor families lived in deep harmony with the turning of the year. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how every beam of sunlight, every frost on the field, and every shifting shadow in the sky told them what to do, when to rest, and how to dream. Spring carried its own breath of hope. Imagine the feel of damp soil beneath your fingers, the smell of fresh earth as fields were planted, the sight of blossoms trembling on orchard branches. The household stirred with excitement, for this was the time of beginnings. Seeds pressed gently into furrows, lambs born in the fields, herbs sprouting in kitchen gardens promised a food and medicine that would sustain the year. In the evenings, the family might gather to share hopes for the harvest, their voices weaving with the soft song of birds returning. Summer demanded energy, its long hours filled with labour under the sun. Hay was cut and dried, wheat fields watched with careful eyes, and fruits gathered with eager hands. The air buzzed with insects, heavy with the scent of ripening crops, while the household worked side by side, knowing the season's bounty was brief. And yet there was laughter here, two songs sung to lighten the labour, festivals marking midsummer with bonfires and merriment. The long evenings seemed endless, and life felt abundant, even if the work pressed hard. Then came autumn, the great turning. The air cooled, leaves crisped and fell, and the urgency of harvest filled every moment. Apples were pressed into cider, grains stored in sacks, roots laid in cellars for the long nights ahead. The household bustled from dawn till dusk, hands stained with juice, backs bent under heavy loads. But the spirit was bright with relief. To gather was to survive. Feast days marked the end of harvest. Tables crowded with dishes richer than any other time of year. Imagine the laughter, the smell of roasted meat, the clinking of cups, the relief of abundance briefly shared. Winter, though, was the season of quiet endurance. Frost crept through cracks in walls, winds rattled shutters, nights stretched endlessly long. Yet even here there was comfort. The hearth became the center of life, families huddling close, telling stories, singing softly, weaving cloth and mending tools. Food was plain, stretched carefully, but warmth of spirit made up for scarcity. And here lies the gentle twist. Though we often picture winter as hardship, many Tudor families remembered it as their most intimate season, the one where bonds were strongest, laughter closest, and songs sweetest against the dark. Stay with me, because this rhythm of the seasons shaped everything: the meals they ate, the clothes they wore, the prayers they whispered, even the dreams they carried into sleep. To live so close to the earth meant that time was never wasted, and life felt woven into the grand pattern of nature itself. Now, as you picture the seasons passing, one after the other, imagine your breath moving with them, fresh and bright as spring, full and steady as summer, deep and restful as autumn, slow and still as winter. Each season carries you safely to the next, and in the Tudor household, that cycle was both compass and comfort. If the seasons ruled the household's tasks, then festivals and celebrations ruled its joys. Life was not all labor and duty. It was also woven with moments of light, where music, dance, and feasting turned even the humblest village into a place of wonder. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how Tudor celebrations filled hearts with warmth and laughter, and why these brief moments of merriment were remembered long after the candles burned low. The calendar itself was a map of holy days and feast days, guiding not just worship but also festivity. Christmas, Easter, May Day, harvest festivals, each carried its own rituals, its own songs, its own flavors. Imagine Christmas in a Tudor home, greenery woven into garlands, holly and ivy draped across beams, the hearth blazing bright, the air filled with scents of roasted meats, pies, and spiced ale. Children laughed, games were played, and songs rose in cheerful harmony. For a short while, hunger and hardship were forgotten, replaced by the glow of abundance. May Day brought its own delights. Picture the village green alive with music, the maypole bright with ribbons, young and old dancing in circles that blurred into laughter. Flowers crowned heads, drums and fiddles set a rhythm, and the air was sweet with blossoms. These festivals carried not only joy but also a sense of community, binding neighbors together, reminding each household that they were part of something larger than themselves. Weddings were another kind of feast, brimming with food, music, and dance. A wedding in a Tudor village was not only the union of two people but of two families, celebrated by all who knew them. Imagine the bride in her best gown, the groom proud beside her, the tables heavy with bread, ale, and roasted meats. The music played late into the night, and laughter carried into the fields. A reminder that joy, too, was survival, a way of binding spirits against the weight of daily labor. And here's the quiet twist. Though these festivals seem like rare interruptions, they were vital to Tudor life. They were the moments when exhaustion lifted, when community was strengthened, when hope was renewed. Without them, the endless rhythm of chores would have felt heavier, colder. With them, even the poorest could taste abundance. Even the most weary could dance. Stay with me a little longer. Imagine the glow of torches at night, the flicker of candles, the sound of fiddles and drums carrying across the village. Hear the footsteps on wooden floors, the shuffle of dance, the clink of cups raised in cheer. Feel the warmth of bodies gathered close, the laughter spilling like sunlight, even in the heart of winter. These festivals were not simply diversions. They were the sparks that kept the spirit glowing through the darker months. As the night quieted again, candles snuffed one by one, the memory of joy lingered, like embers glowing long after the fire seemed out. And perhaps you too can feel it the way even a brief moment of laughter, of music, of togetherness can carry you far, keeping you safe in the rhythm of days. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel the texture of Tudor clothing against your skin, the coarse wool, the softened linen, the weight of layers upon layers that carried warmth as well as meaning. Clothes were not only practical, but spoke of identity, of status, of belonging. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how every fold of fabric, every stitch made by hand, was as important to Tudor life as bread or fire. Begin with the simplest garments. For most, linen was the base, a shift worn next to the skin, soft from many washings, absorbing the sweat and protecting the outer layers. Over this came wool, heavy and durable, dyed in muted colors drawn from plants and roots browns, grays, soft greens, and russets. The garments were practical, built to withstand weather, labor, and time. Yet even in their plainness, they carried quiet beauty, stitched with care, patched with patience, and often handed down through generations. Children's clothes mirrored their parents, though smaller, looser, allowing for growth. A child might wear the same shift day after day, mended over and over until the fabric was more patch than cloth. But in each stitch lay love, proof that the household cared for every body it sheltered. Servants, too, wore plain garments, often of rougher weave, but still carried dignity in their neatness, their readiness for work. And here lies the twist. While we may imagine Tudor dress as rich gowns and jeweled doublets, those were the clothes of nobility. The vast majority lived in the rhythm of wool and linen, their beauty found not in extravagance but in endurance. A fine new gown was rare, often reserved for festivals or weddings, while daily life was wrapped in practicality. Imagine the sounds of clothing, the rustle of skirts against rushes, the creak of leather shoes, the quiet swish of wool when someone passed in the dim light. Each sound told of presence, of movement, of life within the walls. And then there was the feel, warmth in winter, sometimes stifling heat in summer, the weight of garments that reminded you always of the body's labor. Clothes were not a luxury, but a second skin, binding people to their world as surely as the seasons. Stay with me because clothing also marked status. The wealthier might wear brighter dyes, imported fabrics like silk or velvet, and finer linen against the skin. Laws known as sumptuary laws even dictated who could wear what, ensuring that clothing reflected one's place in society. But within the humble home, those distinctions softened. What mattered most was warmth, durability, and care. A well-patched sleeve, a clean apron, a carefully mended hem, these were signs of respect and diligence. The making of clothes was itself a rhythm of life. Wool had to be shorn, carded, spun, woven, dyed, and stitched. Linen came from flax, laboriously retted, beaten, spun, and woven. Every garment carried with it countless hours of work, and each thread was touched by many hands. Imagine the sound of scissors slicing through cloth, the pricking of needles, the quiet sigh of a woman leaning close to candlelight as she finished a hem. Clothes were never disposable. They were living objects, cherished and repaired until no more could be done. As night fell, garments were folded carefully, laid near the bed for warmth, sometimes doubled as covers if blankets were few. Shoes, often scarce and precious, were cleaned and set aside. To own a good pair of shoes was wealth in itself, their leather stiff at first but softening with time, carrying the imprint of each step. And so, clothing in the Tudor household was far more than fabric. It was protection, identity, labor, and love, all stitched together. And perhaps you too can feel the comfort of that idea that even in the humblest patch, there lies proof of care, of endurance, of belonging. If clothing wrapped the body, then food and drink filled the spirit, and no Tudor household could be understood without stepping softly into its kitchen and pantry. Already we've spoken of bread and pottage, but the truth runs deeper. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how every loaf, every jug of ale, every crumb of cheese told a story of survival, ingenuity, and quiet celebration. The hearth, as you know, was the center. Upon it, pots hung from iron hooks, kettles simmered, spits turned slowly when meat was available. The smell of wood smoke clung to everything, weaving flavor into every dish. Bread baked in heavy ovens, sometimes communal ones shared by villagers, the scent drifting across fields to call people home. And though food was often plain, the comfort it brought was beyond measure. For the poor, meals were simple: bread, pottage, small ale, perhaps a little cheese or butter. Meat was rare, reserved for special days or when scraps could be afforded. Fish, often salted or smoked, was eaten especially on Fridays or holy days when meat was forbidden. Eggs, when hens were generous, added richness. Vegetables came from gardens, earthy and fresh, and herbs gave flavor where spice could not. Imagine the sharpness of parsley, the sweetness of fennel, the bite of onion, small bursts of variety in an otherwise steady fare. For those with more means, tables grew richer, roasted meats, pies filled with game or fruit, puddings heavy with suet, spice dishes flavored with imports like pepper, cinnamon, or cloves. And yet, even in these houses, food was not taken for granted. To gather, to cook, to eat was to affirm life itself, to share the work of many hands. Stay with me, Bee, 'cause drinks mattered just as much. Ale was everywhere, brewed often in the household itself, with each batch slightly different, flavored by the water, the grains, the hand that brewed it. Cider and perry flowed in orchard regions, while the wealthy might sip imported wines. For children, the weak ale was nourishment. For adults, it was comfort. For all, it was safety, cleaner than water and always ready to sustain. Picture now the act of feasting, even in the humblest home. A festival might bring out hidden stores, a piece of bacon salted and saved, a small pie baked golden, a jug of stronger ale poured generously. Laughter rose, songs were sung, and for a time hunger was forgotten. In wealthier homes, feasts dazzled with multiple courses, with roasted swans, gilded sugarworks, and elaborate entertainments. Yet beneath all the pomp, the purpose was the same: to celebrate survival, to bind community, to remind all that life carried sweetness as well as labor. And here lies the gentle twist. Food in Tudor England was never just nourishment. It was memory, community, ritual. To break bread together was to bind lives. To drink from the same jug was to share trust. Even the simplest bowl of pottage, eaten with family in the quiet glow of the hearth, carried a weight of meaning as deep as any royal feast. As you imagine this now, let yourself breathe in the scents, the smoke, the bread, the herbs, and feel the warmth of a shared meal settling in your chest. In the Tudor household, food was not merely survival. It was life itself, flavored by love, by tradition, by the steady rhythm of hands that tended fire and garden alike. Beyond food and clothing, there was another texture that shaped daily life in a Tudor household: the walls, beams, and floors themselves. The very structure of the home carried its own story, whispering of labor, tradition, and endurance. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how each timber and each patch of plaster shaped not only the air people breathed, but also the sense of safety that held them through the centuries. Picture a modest Tudor house. Its beams are dark and weathered, often oak, their weight bending slightly under time's hand. Between them, panels of wattle and daub-woven sticks, daubed with a mixture of clay, earth, and straw, formed the walls. Whitewashed, they gleam softly in daylight, though inside, smoke darkens their corners, giving the rooms a patina of lived-in warmth. Floors are often uneven, some paved with stone, others plain earth, covered in fresh rushes that are replaced when soiled. Every creak of a board, every whisper of a draught reminds you this house is alive, breathing with its occupants. The hearth sits at the center, smoke curling up through a chimney or sometimes only through a hole in the roof, filling the rafters with a haze that scents every cloth and hair. The smell is constant, familiar, never harsh. It binds the household, a reminder of warmth and food. Around the hearth, stools, benches, and a heavy table gather the family, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands and elbows. Furniture is plain but sturdy, built to last, made by local craftsmen or even the household's own master with tools, sharpened in the yard. And here lies the gentle twist. Though Tudor houses may seem simple to us, to their occupants they were marvels of security. To own a roof, to close a door against the wind, to hear the rain tapping harmlessly above that, was wealth in itself. Each beam overhead was more than wood. It was reassurance, a shield against the vast uncertainty of the outside world. Listen now, and you can hear the sounds of the house, the pop of the hearth, the whisper of fabric as someone moves, the faint patter of rain on thatched roof. Thatch was common, its golden bundles tightly bound, insulating and waterproof. In winter, frost sometimes clung to the inside walls, yet within the home, blankets and bodies shared warmth, and life continued, steady and sure. Windows, small and sometimes filled with oiled cloth or simple glass, let in light but reminded all of the preciousness of clear air. Even sunlight itself was treasured, slipping in golden streaks across beams and rushes. Stay with me, 'cause in a moment you'll see how the house itself became part of the family story. Over years, beams warped, walls cracked, doors sagged, and yet each repair added another layer of memory. A patch of new plaster marked a past storm. A freshly thatched roof told of neighbors lending hands. A carved date on a beam, initials scratched in a corner, these small marks were a kind of diary, etched not with ink but with presence. At night, the house embraced its occupants. Shadows lengthened, the rushlight glowed, beams loomed overhead like steady guardians, and, though draughts whispered through cracks and wind-rattled shutters, the home held firm, a cocoon against the dark. Perhaps you can feel it now, that sense of being sheltered not only by walls but by time itself, by the endurance of wood and stone that have stood through countless nights before. So as you rest in this imagined house, let its beams rise around you, its hearth warm you, its thatch shield you. Breathe with its creaks, with its sighs, and know that here, within these walls, you are safe, wrapped in the same comfort that sheltered Tudor families for centuries. Within the Tudor household, the rhythms of life were not only shaped by seasons and labor, but also by sound, the music of voices, instruments, and songs that carried through rooms and fields. Stay close, because in a moment you'll hear how music shaped joy, soothed labor, and wrapped the Tudor family in comfort, even when food was scarce or nights were long. Music lived everywhere. In the kitchen, a servant hummed while kneading dough, the soft tune rising above the crackle of the hearth. In the yard, children sang simple rhymes, their voices skipping like stones across water. At festivals, fiddles, pipes, and drums filled the air with lively tunes that set feet moving, laughter spilling into the night. To us, it might seem like a luxury, but for them, music was as necessary as bread, as steady as prayer. The instruments were simple, yet their voices rich. Imagine the strum of a lute, its strings humming warm against the hush of a chamber. Picture a recorder's soft notes drifting through candlelight, or the steady beat of a tabor drum guiding a dance on the village green. Even those without instruments made music with their voices, harmonies rising in alehouses, lullabies whispered in bedchambers, chants echoing in churches. Music was not performance for an audience, it was life itself, shared among all. And here lies the twist. Though Tudor England is remembered for grand courtly music, the melodies that truly carried the age were simple ones, sung by ordinary people. Ballads told stories of love, of loss, of caution, passed from voice to voice, each singer adding their own touch. Work songs eased heavy labor, their rhythms matching the swing of a scythe or the pounding of grain. Lullabies wrapped children in comfort, their gentle refrains as protective as blankets. Stay with me, be, 'cause music also carried memory. A song learned in childhood was sung again in old age, linking generations. Ballads could travel from village to village, carrying news, lessons, or warnings. And even without parchment or ink, songs kept stories alive, breathed into ears by firelight, passed into dreams. Festivals brought music at its brightest. Imagine a May Day celebration, fiddles quick, drums pulsing, voices rising in chorus as dancers spun around the maypole. Or a wedding where laughter and song blended into a tapestry of joy. Even at Christmas, hymns and carols filled homes and churches alike, their harmonies lifting hearts during the darkest days of the year. Music was both escape and anchor, carrying people above their burdens while also rooting them in the comfort of shared sound. And in the quiet of night, music softened to whispers, a mother singing softly to her child, an apprentice humming to himself by the dying embers. The memory of a festival tune still echoing faintly in ears as sleep approached. Music held the Tudor household as gently as the beams and hearth did, wrapping it in warmth, in memory, in belonging. So now, as you breathe slowly, imagine those sounds weaving around you. The strum of a lute, the whisper of a song, the beat of a drum far off in the night. Let it settle in your chest like a lullaby, steady and safe, For in the Tudor home, music was not luxury, but necessity, as nourishing as bread, as sheltering as prayer. Night has fallen once more, and the Tudor household glows softly with the breath of its hearth and the flicker of its rushlights. The day's work is finished, the chores set aside, the doors barred against the chill and the dark. It is in these hours, quiet and tender, that the house reveals something even more precious than food or clothing, more lasting than beams and thatch, the closeness of family, the warmth of bonds that held the household together through hardship and plenty alike. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how family life in Tudor England, with all its imperfections and tenderness, became the truest hearth of all. Imagine the family gathered now. The master sits with a heavy cloak wrapped around his shoulders, his face softened by the firelight. The mistress is nearby, her hands never fully idle, even in the evening, perhaps mending a tear or stirring a small pot of herbs for medicine. The children, if not already asleep, cluster close, listening to stories, their heads resting against laps or cushions stuffed with straw. Servants may be present too, part of the household in more than name, their duties lessening as the night deepens, allowing them to sit quietly and share in the stillness. The fire pops softly, shadows tremble against plaster walls, and the room hums with a calm that is both fragile and strong. To understand Tudor family life, you must first remember that family meant more than blood. A household often included servants, apprentices, sometimes even boarders or distant kin who sought shelter beneath its roof. Each person belonged to a web of care and duty, bound by necessity and tradition. The master's word held authority, the mistress's hand held order, and the children's obedience was expected. Yet within this structure was affection, laughter, and the small gestures of tenderness that softened the rules. A gentle hand brushing hair from a child's brow, a servant offered an extra bite of bread, a song sung softly to ease the fear of the dark. And here lies the quiet twist. Though modern stories often paint Tudor families as strict, distant, or harsh, many records suggest otherwise. Households were full of affection, shaped by the constant closeness of life lived together. Privacy was scarce, but so was loneliness. To share a bed, to share a meal, to share labor was to weave bonds that could not easily fray. Imagine the warmth of a sleeping child against your arm, the comfort of voices whispering prayers together, the safety of knowing that in the hush of night you were never alone. Stay with me, because in a moment we'll look closer at the children. Their lives were not carefree in the modern sense. Chores and discipline were constant, but love wove through their days all the same. A child might be scolded for idleness, but that same child would be wrapped in wool blankets at night, soothed with lullabies that had been sung for generations. Play existed too, wooden dolls carved from scraps, balls made of rags, games in the yard with laughter carrying through the air. These simple joys, brief and precious, balanced the weight of duty. Children learned responsibility early, but they also learned the music of togetherness, the rhythm of laughter woven into labor. The mistress's role within family life was profound. She was mother not only to her own children, but often to apprentices, servants, and sometimes even neighbors' children left in her care. Her voice set the tone for the household. Her patience smoothed quarrels. Her prayers steadied fears. In her hands, bread was baked, clothes were mended, wounds were soothed, and spirits were lifted. To live in her orbit was to live within the shelter of constant care. Picture her now, candlelight softening her face as she bends over, stitching, her voice humming a quiet hymn while children drift toward sleep at her feet. The master's presence carried weight too. His authority could be stern, but it was tempered by the knowledge that his household's survival rested not only on his strength, but also on his fairness. He might tell tales of his own youth, stories of the seasons, or even a ballad half remembered from his father's voice. At times, he was teacher as much as provider, guiding his children in prayer or leading apprentices in understanding the rhythms of field and market. Though he was the figure of discipline, his laughter, when it came, was deep and memorable, a sound that reassured all who heard it. And now, let us soften the lamp even further and consider the ties between siblings. Brothers and sisters grew up side by side, sharing work, sharing beds, sharing play. They argued, of course, sometimes bitterly, but their bond was unbroken by distance, for distance rarely existed. They saw one another from dawn until dusk, their lives so entwined that each memory was shared. To lose a sibling in childhood, as sadly was common, was to lose a piece of oneself. And so, even the smallest games or whispers between siblings were precious, carrying a weight of memory that would last long after candles burned out. Servants and apprentices, though not kin by blood, were often folded into this sense of family. Some were treated harshly, but many were loved as if sons or daughters. Their successes celebrated, their failures corrected with patience. To sit at the hearth alongside them was to acknowledge shared life, shared fate. And so the Tudor household was not only a nuclear family, but a woven fabric of many threads, each necessary, each valued dot. Stay with me, because there is something tender here, worth noticing. The rituals of care. When a child was ill, the entire household bent toward healing. Herbs were brewed, prayers whispered, blankets warmed by the fire. When someone traveled, the family gathered to bless them, their prayers following into the dark. When work was heavy, hands joined together to lighten the load. These small gestures of care were the true wealth of a Tudor household. Wealth measured not in coin, but in kindness. And when the night deepened, and sleep finally claimed each body, family closeness lingered even in dreams. Beds were shared, breaths mingled, warmth passed from one to another. To fall asleep in such company was to surrender fear, to know that if shadows stirred, you were not alone in facing them. Even the faintest sound of another's breathing could bring reassurance, steadying the hearts until morning light returned. So now, as you sit with me in this Tudor household, let yourself feel that closeness too. Imagine the warmth of bodies near, the softness of shared laughter, the steady rhythm of voices murmuring prayers. Let yourself rest in the knowledge that family, in all its forms, was the truest hearth of Tudor life, and that you too are wrapped in bonds that carry you safely through the dark. To live in a Tudor household was to live in constant closeness not only with family but with neighbours, parish and village. The home was never an island. It was a thread woven into a larger fabric. What happened within one doorway often echoed across many others. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how community itself became an extension of the household, binding lives together in ways that made the smallest cottages feel part of something greater than themselves. Imagine stepping outside the door at dawn, the air cool and damp, the mist still clinging to the fields. You would hear not silence, but the soft chorus of many homes stirring at once. The cluck of hens from a neighbour's yard, the faint strike of flint as another hearth was lit, the distant creak of a cartwheel on damp earth. Life in Tudor England unfolded not in solitude but in harmony, each sound a reminder that others were near, living the same rhythms, carrying the same burdens, To hear these sounds was to feel less alone. The parish was the heart of this community. The church bells rang out across fields and cottages, marking not only time but also belonging. They called families to Mass, told for the passing of souls, and rang in celebration at weddings or festivals. Inside the church, stone cooled the air, candles flickered against coloured glass, and voices rose in prayer. Whether one could read the scriptures or not, the shared rituals of standing, kneeling, singing, and praying created a sense of unity deeper than words. To miss a service was not just a matter of faith, but of social fabric. It was to step outside the rhythm of the whole dot. And here lies the gentle twist. Though the Tudor world was marked by great religious conflict, with monarchs shifting the realm between Catholic and Protestant faiths, most households lived faith not in debate but in community. Their daily prayers, their attendance at Mass, their observance of holy days, these were acts of belonging as much as belief. The parish church was not only a place of worship, but also a place of meeting, of learning news, of finding comfort in the shared company of neighbours. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how neighbours leaned on one another. To raise a house was to raise it together, beams lifted by many arms, laughter mixing with labour. To harvest was to work side by side, sheaves gathered in common rhythm. When a child was born, women gathered to help, bringing broth, bread, or care for older siblings. When someone died, the bells tolled, the community gathered, and grief was shared like bread. This web of support was as necessary as fire or water, and it softened the sharp edges of hardship. Markets and fairs added another layer. Once a week, or at certain seasons, villagers gathered in bustling spaces where stalls groaned with goods, bread, cheese, cloth, tools, herbs, salted fish. The air buzzed with voices, laughter, bargaining, and sometimes song. Children darted between legs, wide-eyed at the colours and smells. For households, markets were not only places to buy and sell, but also to meet, to hear news from distant towns, to learn of changes at court or in law. Imagine the smell of roasted nuts, the sight of ribbons bright against plain wall, the murmur of gossip travelling faster than any cart. In the evenings after such gatherings, the household carried home more than goods. They carried stories, news of a neighbour's fortune, of a distant cousin's wedding, of a rumour about taxes or Warsaw, became part of the fabric of talk by the hearth. These stories, shared over bowls of pottage or mugs of ale, bound the household not only to itself, but to the larger world. Even if the walls were plain and the life was humble, the household was never cut off. And here's something worth pausing on: hospitality. To welcome a neighbour with a mug of ale, to offer a traveller a place by the fire, to share bread when one had little to spare. These acts were not only kindness, but also expectation. To fail in hospitality was to risk standing apart from the community, to risk suspicion or loneliness. But to open the door, to share even a crust, was to weave oneself tighter into the web of belonging. You can almost feel it now, can't you? That warmth of being welcomed, of hearing, "Sit closer to the fire, there's room. Stay with me a little longer, and let's turn to the bonds of trust." Life was uncertain. Illness, crop failure, storms, or politics could change everything overnight. And so, trust was currency. To borrow grain and return it later, to share seed, to help mend a roof or tend animals, these acts built invisible wealth that no tax collector could measure. A Tudor household, rich in neighbours' goodwill, was safer than one with gold but no friends. Festivals. too, drew households together. May Day, Christmas, harvest feasts all became moments where private homes spilled into public joy. Songs were sung not alone but in chorus, dances turned strangers into partners, and food was shared across thresholds. A roast might be carved in one home but tasted in many mouths. Children carried these memories, their laughter braided into the laughter of others, until the line between family and neighbor blurred. And when hardship struck, when illness thinned a household's numbers, when fire or flood damaged a roof, it was the community that carried them through. Neighbors brought blankets, food, or simply their presence. They prayed together, worked together, and mourned together. And in this, the Tudor household discovered its truest security, not only the beams above, but the many hands around. As night deepens in this vision, imagine the household once more by the fire, their door closed, but their hearts open to the knowledge that beyond their walls, other doors glow with the same firelight, other voices whisper the same prayers. In the silence between heartbeats, they are not alone, but part of a great web of life, stitched across fields and villages, held together by trust and care. So now, as you breathe slowly with me, let yourself feel that same belonging. Imagine neighbors' voices faint in the distance, the soft toll of a bell, the murmur of a marketplace, the laughter of a shared feast. Let it settle around you like a blanket, reminding you that even the humblest home was never solitary. The Tudor household was always part of something greater. And so too are you, safe, seen, and carried by invisible threads of community that have never ceased to bind. Though the household was a place of comfort and rhythm, it was also a place where illness and healing shaped daily life. To live in Tudor England was to live with uncertainty, for medicine was a fragile art, caught between ancient tradition, prayer, and the simple wisdom of herbs grown in the garden. Stay close, because in a moment you'll see how a household became its own apothecary, how sickness touched every family, and how care was expressed not only in remedies but in tenderness. Imagine a child coughing in the night. The household stirs, the mistress rising from her bed, pulling her shawl close against the chill. She moves quietly to the hearth, coaxing the embers to life, for warmth is the first medicine. A kettle is filled, herbs crushed by hand time for the lungs, chamomile for calm, honey stirred in for sweetness. The steam rises, carrying fragrance through the room, while the child sips slowly, eyes heavy, soothed not only by the remedy, but by the presence of care. Herbs were the foundation of healing. The mistress often kept bundles drying by the fire, jars of powders and salves tucked in cupboards, each with its own use. Sage for sore throats, rosemary for memory, lavender for rest. The knowledge was passed down from mothers to daughters, whispered over kitchens and gardens, tested in times of need. Though some remedies worked better than others, the act of giving them was an act of love, of reassurance, as powerful as the plants themselves. But healing was not only herbs. Prayer, too, was medicine. A cross traced on a brow, a whispered psalm, a candle lit before an iconal carried comfort in moments of fear. Illness was often seen as both physical and spiritual, and so remedies were layered with devotion. To pray beside the sick was to remind them they were not alone, that the household and God alike watched over them. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see the other side of this truth. Death was never far. Many children did not survive to adulthood, and households often carried grief as much as laughter. Yet even in grief there was tenderness. The family would gather, neighbors would come, prayers would rise, and memories would be spoken by the hearth. Loss, though sharp, was softened by community, by ritual, by the knowledge that care had been given. The master of the house, too, played a role in health. He might fetch a local healer, or, if wealth allowed, a physician, though physicians were rare in villages. More often, the household relied on its own wisdom, on remedies grown in soil and tended with patient hands. Midwives, herbalists, and wise women carried knowledge that guided births, treated fevers, and soothed wounds. Their work was valued, even revered, for without them, survival would falter. Illness also reshaped the rhythms of the household. When one fell sick, others took on their tasks, carrying water, feeding animals, baking bread. Work did not cease, but it shifted, bent to accommodate weakness. In this way, sickness revealed the fabric of family, each member stepping closer, each hand offered to keep the household steady. And here lies the gentle twist. Though medicine was uncertain, healing often came through the act of care itself. To sit beside a sick bed, to stroke a brow, to whisper comfort, these gestures carried power no tincture could match. The household itself became a healer, its closeness the greatest remedy of all. At night, when the rushlight flickered and shadows swayed, prayers lingered in the air. The sick rested, the family hushed their voices, and the house seemed to hold its breath, guarding its own. Whether recovery came or not, the household had done its work. It had surrounded illness with love, with presence, with the steady rhythm of care. So now, as you breathe slowly, let yourself feel that comfort too. Imagine the warmth of herbs steeping, the hush of voices by your side, the reassurance of hands near. In a Tudor household, healing was not perfect, but it was tender, and it was enough to carry the spirit safely through the night. If illness brought shadows, then play and pastimes brought light, softening the hard edges of Tudor life. Even in a world of constant labor, there was space for laughter, for games, for songs, for small delights that carried spirits through the long seasons. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how Tudor households found joy in the simplest of things, and how even the most modest home held room for happiness. Children, of course, found play wherever they could. They tossed balls made of rags, carved dolls from scraps of wood, and played games of chase in the yard. They sang rhymes that echoed through generations, verses that we still faintly recognize today. Their laughter carried across fields, softening the toil of parents at work, and in these moments the harshness of life eased, replaced by the timeless joy of youth. Adults, too, sought diversion. On quiet evenings, games of cards or dice might be played by the fire, the clink of tokens or the shuffle of cards blending with the crackle of the hearth. Stories were told, riddles shared, songs sung in gentle harmony. At festivals, dances filled village greens, music quickening feet and laughter spilling under stars. Even the simplest jig or ballad could transform a weary evening into one of delight. Stay with me, 'cause here is a gentle twist. Pastimes were not indulgence, they were necessity. Without joy, the labor of life would have grown too heavy, the nights too long. To laugh, to sing, to play was to strengthen the spirit, to remind the household that life carried sweetness alongside duty. Even the poorest family, with little to spare, could find delight in shared stories, in the rhythm of song, in the comfort of companionship. Board games existed too. Some brought from older times, played on boards, carved into tables, or on scraps of wood. Merrills, a game of strategy, was common, its pieces simple, stones or buttons. Children learned it quickly, their concentration earnest, while parents smiled at their seriousness. And in the act of play, bonds grew stronger between siblings, between parents and children, between masters and servants alike. Alehouses added another layer. For men especially, evenings at the local alehouse brought companionship, laughter and song. The clink of mugs, the low hum of voices, the warmth of firelight created a second home, one woven into the fabric of community. Yet even here, the spirit of play remained gentle, a reminder that work was not the whole of life, and here lies the deeper truth. Joy was often found not in abundance, but in scarcity. A single apple shared, a ribbon won at a fair, a tune remembered from youth, these small treasures carried weight. They were remembered for years, spoken of by the hearth long after the moment had passed. In this way, Tudor households taught themselves to savour joy when it appeared, to let it linger like the sweetness of honey on the tongue. Evenings often ended with songs. Some were ballads of history or caution, others simple lullabies. Voices blended, some strong, some wavering, but together they created harmony. Children drifted into sleep with music in their ears. Apprentices found comfort in familiar refrains, and the house itself seemed to hum with sound. The music did not erase hardship, but it softened it, wrapping life in melody the way blankets wrapped bodies in warmth. So now, as you sit again by the hearth in this imagined home, hear the laughter of children, the shuffle of cards, the hum of song. Let yourself feel the lightness of these pastimes, their power to lift even the heaviest day. For in a Tudor household, play was not escape, was life's balm, life's reminder that joy was always waiting to be found. To sit within a Tudor household was to be surrounded not only by people, but also by animals, creatures, whose presence shaped the rhythm of every day. Some lived outside, some inside, some hovered between the two, and all carried meaning. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how these animals were not only sources of food or labor, but also companions, protectors, and quiet symbols of life itself. Begin with the hens. Their clucking filled the morning, their feathers stirred the air in the yard, their eggs gathered with gratitude. A basket of warm eggs was treasure, each shell carrying nourishment and hope. Children often took on the task of collecting them, small fingers reaching into straw, giggling when hens pecked at their hands. The soft sound of chickens was constant, so familiar it became part of the house's music. Pigs, too, rooted near the edge of the yard, their snorts and squeals rough but endearing. They grew fat on scraps and forage, and though their end often meant meat for the household, while they lived they were characters in themselves, curious, noisy, full of personality. Cows grazed in meadows, their lowing deep and steady, the rhythm of milk filling pails in early mornings and dusky evenings. The mistress or servant leaned close to their warmth, hands working with practiced ease. The sound of milk striking wood, blending with birdsong or wind. And here lies the twist. Though we often imagine Tudor animals only as resources, they were more than that. Dogs curled near the hearth, guarding the door, watching with loyal eyes. Cats slinked silently through shadows, keeping mice from grain stores, their presence half myth, half necessity. Horses pulled carts, carried riders, and were treated with care, for a strong horse was as valuable as gold. In the closeness of daily life, animals were companions as much as tools, their personalities woven into memory. Stay with me, 'cause animals shaped festivals and beliefs too. Lambs in spring were signs of renewal, their bleats echoing like bells of hope. Birds carried omens. To hear the cuckoo was to mark the turn of the year. Bees buzzed in hives tended with reverence, their honey sweetening food and medicine alike. Superstitions curled around animals. A black cat could mean fortune or fear. A crow's call might foretell weather, a dog's howl might be read as omen. To live among animals was to live within a world of signs, each feather or paw a whisper from the natural world. Children grew up with these creatures as part of their play. A calf might nuzzle their hands, a puppy tumble at their feet, a kitten curl against their side at night. To lose an animal could bring grief, as real in its own way as the loss of a neighbor. For though practical necessity demanded their use, affection was never absent. And here's something tender worth noticing. Animals taught patience. The cow had to be milked slowly, the horse groomed with care, the dog trained gently, the cat respected for its independence. In tending them, children learned responsibility, adults learned endurance, and the household itself found rhythm in their needs. At night, animals added to the lullaby of life. Dogs barked softly in the yard, hens rustled in their coops, cows shifted heavily in stalls. These sounds reassured rather than disturbed, reminders that life pulsed beyond the walls, steady and constant. The household never truly slept alone. It was surrounded by breath, by heartbeat, by creatures who shared its world. So now, as you breathe slowly with me, imagine those sounds, the soft cluck, the low moo, the purr by the hearth. Let them settle around you like a blanket of presence. For in the Tudor household, animals were not only sustenance. They were companions, protectors, teachers, and quiet singers in the chorus of daily life. If animals shared the household space, then weather shaped its soul. No Tudor family could ignore the sky, for it ruled every labor, every feast, every hope. The household listened constantly to the whisper of wind, the weight of clouds, the sparkle of frost, the heat of summer sun. Stay close, because in a moment you'll see how weather was not simply background, but the very stage upon which Tudor life was lived. Picture spring rains first. They fell softly at times, drumming gently on thatch, feeding the soil, greening the world. But sometimes they came in torrents, flooding fields, turning paths to mud, delaying planting, and filling hearts with worry. A household learned patience in spring, trusting that seeds would grow, that rain would balance with sun. The smell of wet earth filled the air, children splashed in puddles, and the promise of new growth shimmered despite the mud. Summer brought long light heat pressing on shoulders bent in fields. The sun bleached thatch, dried laundry on hedges, ripened fruits until they burst with sweetness. But drought could bite, fields could wither, wells could run low. Households watched the sky with constant hope, reading clouds as carefully as books. A sudden storm might bring both relief and fear, rain soaking fields, but lightning threatening fire. Each clap of thunder was felt as deeply as a neighbor's knock. Stay with me, bee, 'cause autumn brought its own drama. Mists rolled over fields, leaves burned gold and red, the air sharpened with chill. Harvest depended on the mercy of weather. One untimely frost could ruin months of labor. Families rose before dawn, working until stars burned, driven by the urgency of shortening days. Yet when weather blessed them, autumn was abundance. Apples heavy, grains dry and golden, cellars filling with plenty. The household's spirits rose with every sack stored, every jar sealed, every barn filled with hay. Winter was the hardest master. Frost rimed windows, winds howled through gaps, snow buried paths. Food grew scarce, wood stacks shrank, and nights stretched long. Yet winter also brought intimacy. Families huddled by fires, told stories, sang carols, shared what little they had. To survive a winter was to feel triumph, the crackle of a hearth, the glow of candlelight. The warmth of blanketsole became lifelines against the dark, and here lies the gentle twist. Though weather was feared, it was also cherished. The smell of fresh rain, the brilliance of snow, the softness of summer twilight carried beauty that wove into memory. To live so close to the elements was to notice them deeply, to find poetry in clouds and solace in stars. Weather also shaped belief. A storm might be seen as God's warning, a rainbow as his promise. Prayers rose with drought, gratitude with rain. Farmers read winds and birds as signs, trusting instinct as much as science. Weather was both mystery and measure, always reminding the household of its place within creation. Stay with me, because weather shaped the smallest details too. Clothes hung to dry by the hearth when rains came, cloaks warmed by fire before stepping into snow, shutters fastened against gales. Meals shifted with seasons, lighter in summer, heavier in winter. Even moods followed skies, laughter brighter on sunny days, prayers heavier when storms lingered at night. Weather sang its own lullabies. Rain pattered softly on thatch, wind whispered through eaves, snow hushed the world into silence. These sounds did not frighten, they comforted. They were proof that the world outside still moved, still turned, while the household rested safely within. So now, as you rest with me, imagine those sounds around you, the patter of rain, the sigh of wind, the hush of snow. Let them cradle you, steady and timeless. For in a Tudor household, weather was not only challenge, it was companion, teacher, poet, and the eternal rhythm that carried each life forward. In the Tudor household, daily life was not only measured by seasons, labor, and meals, but also by time itself, told not by clocks on walls, but by bells, shadows, candles, and instinct. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how the passing of ours was felt not in numbers but in rhythm, and how this rhythm brought both order and comfort to every day. Clocks were rare. Their steady tick-tock reserved for churches, wealthy halls, or town centers. For most households, time came from the church bell's toll, calling them to morning prayer, marking midday, signaling evening. The bell was not only a sound but a thread, tying scattered cottages and fields together, keeping them in step with one another. To hear the bell was to feel the heartbeat of community, a reminder that life moved forward in shared measure. Candles and rushlights told time within the home. A rushlight might last an hour or two, its flame flickering lower as evening deepened. Candles, made of tallow or beeswax, burned more steadily, their lengths sometimes marked to measure hours. The family would glance at their shrinking light, noting how long until the next task, the next prayer, or the night's end. The gentle flicker of flame became the quiet keeper of time, as intimate as breath itself. The sun, too, was a clock. Its rising stirred the household to labor, its setting called them home. Its height in the sky marked midday rest. Shadows stretched across floors, shifted on beams, and told the passing of hours as clearly as any dial. Children grew up learning to read these shadows, to know when it was time for chores, for meals, for sleep. The rhythm of light guided all, from sowing to harvest, from birth to burial. And here lies the gentle twist. Though we may think of life without clocks as chaotic, in truth it was deeply ordered. The body itself rose with dawn, rested with dusk. Bells, shadows, and candles wove together a tapestry of time that felt natural, unhurried, steady. There was no rushing to meet the second hand, no anxious glance at minutes slipping by. Instead, time moved like a river, flowing at its own pace, carrying the household gently along. Stay with me because, within this rhythm, tasks found their place. Bread was kneaded in the cool of morning, laundry washed when sun could dry it, fields tended while light lasted, meals eaten at predictable points in the day. Children learned to wake early, to work steadily, to rest when darkness demanded. The lack of artificial light meant nights were long, but this too brought intimacy, more stories, more songs, more closeness by the hearth. Festivals and holy days marked larger time. The ringing of bells on Christmas, the lighting of bonfires at midsummer, the prayers of Lentall punctuated the flow of weeks and months. These markers gave households a sense of progress, of movement, of hope carried forward. To know that Easter approached, or that harvest would soon arrive, was to anchor life in patterns that brought comfort even in uncertainty. And here's something tender. Time was often counted not by hours but by tasks. A child might say, "It will be done in the time it takes to bake bread." A servant might measure distance by how long it took the kettle to boil. The household lived within cycles, not fragments, and each task carried its own span of time. This way of measuring made life feel whole, each action complete in itself, rather than hurried into the next dot. At nighttime slowed. The household watched the last rushlight fade, listened to the last prayers whispered, felt the weight of blankets and the heaviness of breath. Hours passed unnoticed in sleep, until dawn's pale light stirred them again. Time was never lost. It was simply lived, moment by moment, rhythm by rhythm, in a harmony that modern clocks can rarely give. So now, as you breathe with me, let yourself feel that rhythm too. Imagine bells tolling faintly in the distance, shadows sliding across walls, candles flickering lower. Let time stretch wide and soft around you, steady and kind. For in a Tudor household, time was not a burden to chase. It was a companion, guiding life with the gentlest of hands. If time gave the Tudor household its rhythm, then memory gave it its soul. Families carried stories not only in books or parchments, but in voices, gestures, and traditions that lingered long after the fire burned down. Stay with me, because in a moment you'll see how memory wove itself into walls and hearts, turning simple cottages into living archives of love, loss, and belonging. Imagine a child sitting at the feet of an elder, listening as stories unfurled. Tales of ancestors, of village happenings, of lessons learned in harder years. These were spoken softly, sometimes repeated countless times, until they carved themselves into memory. The words might change slightly, but their meaning remained, becoming as steady as the beams overhead. To listen was to inherit, to become part of a chain unbroken by time. Objects, too, carried memory. A wooden cradle, passed down through generations, smoothed by countless small hands. A cloak worn by a mother, patched and mended, then worn again by her daughter. A jug carved with initials, treasured not for its value, but for the lips it had served. Each item in the household told a story, not in words, but in wear, in touch, in presence. The home itself was layered with such memory. Every scratch on a table, a record of laughter or quarrel. Every patch on the wall, a mark of endurance. And here lies the gentle twist. Memory was not always sweet. Loss, hardship, and sorrow were remembered too. A famine year etched itself into prayers, a lost child into silence, a bad harvest into cautious hope for the next. Yet even these memories carried meaning, guiding choices, teaching lessons, reminding households of strength already proven. To remember sorrow was to remember survival, and that survival itself became comfort. Stay with me because memory was also shared through ritual. At Christmas, candles lit in windows recalled those who had sat there before. At Easter, hymns sung echoed voices from generations past. At weddings, dancers repeated steps that grandparents had once danced, laughter rising in the same patterns of joy. Memory lived not only in words but in movements, in gestures repeated across time, making the past part of the present. The churchyard was another keeper of memory. Families walked among stones, speaking names, recalling lives. Children grew up knowing the stories of those who rested there, their ancestors not forgotten but woven into daily speech. To live in the shadow of such remembrance was to feel the weight of belonging, the assurance that one's own life, too, would be remembered. And here's something tender: lullabies. A mother singing to her child often sang the same song her mother had sung, and her mother before her. These melodies carried across centuries, fragile but unbroken, wrapping infants in the memory of countless arms. In their softness, children learned that they belonged to a story far older than themselves. Within the household, memory also guided justice. Remember when this was tried before, someone might say. Remember what came of it. Advice was given not as new instruction, but as recollection, as if memory itself were the wisest teacher. And so, each generation leaned not only on their own strength, but on the collected wisdom of those who had lived before. At night, when the hearth dimmed and only embers glowed, the air felt thick with memory. Voices seemed to linger, the day's stories still echoing faintly, blending with older tales. Sleep came gently, carrying listeners into dreams that often mirrored those memories' faces of loved ones. Familiar places, songs still humming in the background. Memory, in this way, became part of the very fabric of rest. So now, as you breathe slowly, let yourself rest in memory's embrace, too. Imagine the stories told by firelight, the objects worn by many hands, the lullabies drifting through generations. Feel yourself part of that same chain, remembered, cherished, woven into the rhythm of countless nights. For in the Tudor household, memory was not past, was presence, living quietly in every gesture, every word, every breath. We have walked together now through the Tudor household, through its hearth and garden, its laughter and labour, its fears and comforts. Each chapter has been another room, another corner, another breath of life once lived centuries ago. And yet, as the story draws toward its close, the household itself still seems alive. The beams still creak, the rushes still rustle, the fire still glows low. Stay with me one last time, because in a moment you'll see how the Tudor home, though long gone in bricks and timber, still lingers in memory, in spirit, and in the rhythms of our own lives today. The night has deepened. Outside, the village lies quiet, cottages dark except for faint glows where candles stubbornly hold on. The air is cool, the fields still, the sky clear with stars. Inside, The Tudor household is folded into rest. Children breathe softly, curled beneath blankets of wool. The mistress finally sets aside her needle, her eyes heavy, her shoulders releasing the day's weight. The master, after prayers spoken low, stretches on his bed of straw and feather, sighing into sleep. Servants, apprentices, even animals have stilled. Only the faint crackle of embers breaks the silence. It is in this hush that the true heart of the Tudor home reveals itself, not in labor or feasting, not in chatter or song, but in the simple, shared silence of rest. The household, so alive in daylight, becomes a single quiet breath at night, all lives bound together in the same rhythm of sleep. To rest was to trust the roof overhead, the fire's embers, the neighbor's watch, the protection of faith. Sleep was an act of surrender, but also of belonging, and it was taken with the comfort of knowing one did not lie alone. And here lies the gentle twist. Though centuries separate us, the essence of this rest is unchanged. You to know the comfort of routine, the reassurance of familiar sounds, the safety of loved ones near. You too feel the hush when night settles, the warmth of blankets, the drift of breath slowing. The Tudor household was not so different from our own hearts. It longed for safety, for laughter, for nourishment, for love. And in the end, it longed for rest, the same rest that now waits for you. Stay with me a little longer. Think back on all we have seen, the hum of work, the laughter of play, the glow of festivals, the closeness of family, the comfort of community, the rhythm of seasons, the murmur of prayers, the flicker of candles, the stories passed by firelight. Each piece was small, ordinary, yet together they created a life rich with meaning. The Tudor household was not grand, but it was whole, and that wholeness is what still lingers, like embers glowing centuries after the fire was first lit. Memory itself has been our companion. We have leaned close to hear voices long gone, to feel fabrics long worn, to taste bread long eaten. But memory does not vanish, it flows into us, soft and steady, reminding us that every life, no matter how humble, shapes the great story of humanity. Each Tudor family, in its laughter, its labor, its love, has given us a glimpse of what it means to belong. And now, as our journey reaches its close, let us settle into that belonging. Imagine yourself by the last glow of the hearth, the rushlight almost gone. Shadows climb high on the walls. The house breathes softly around you. Outside, the night sky arches vast and endless, stars like quiet prayers scattered across its dark. Inside, you are safe, wrapped in the warmth of centuries, the memory of lives once lived, the comfort of stories told. You have walked the halls, sat by the fire, shared in the work, joined in the laughter. You have become part of the Tudor household, if only in memory, and that memory is yours to keep. Let it soothe you, let it steady you, let it drift with you now into sleep. So breathe slowly. Let your breath fall into rhythm with theirs, with the master's sigh, the mistress's soft murmur, the children's dreams. Let the household's rest become your own. The fire is low, but it will hold through the night. The walls creak gently, but they stand strong. The night is vast, but it is kind. You are safe here, within this story, within this moment, within the quiet of a Tudor home. And if your eyes close now, know that the story continues, not in words, but in dreams. Let the past and the present fold together. Let memory carry you gently. Let sleep take you where it will. The Tudor household rests, and so may you. When you wake, should you wish to wander again, the doors will still be open. Other nights, Other stories, other journeys into history wait softly for you. There is an all-night playlist waiting to carry you from one tale to the next, each told in the same hush, the same warmth, the same gentle rhythm. And if you choose to return, you will always find the hearth lit, the chair ready, the voice steady beside you. For now, let the story fade, let the last embers glow, let the night deepen, and let yourself drift into rest, safe and unhurried, in the company of those who lived long ago, and in the comfort of being part of something greater than yourself. Good night, dear friend.